Hey, everybody, a big welcome to today's guest, Heather Warren. She's a personal growth coach out of Ontario, Canada. She's describes herself as leading heart-led women who have gone through sweet hell and want to bloom in their sweet lives, which is beautiful. Hi, Heather, how are you?
Good, thanks, Carla. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, why don't you tell us all a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you infuse the world?
And I would say that a lot of my approach comes from a soul-based perspective. So I incorporate intuitive readings with mindfulness and really tapping into the inner world, and and also something called family constellations work, which is looking at family and ancestral patterns to be able to understand what you're carrying in this lifetime and how to move forward. I often find that when people set goals, often it's coming from a place of perfectionism, inner criticism, patterns from their what they've learned from their families of who they should be. So we really just want to come back into like, who are you really, and how do you unpack kind of the baggage or the things that you think you should be versus who you actually are, and what leads to your inner peace. How do I infuse the world? I'm hoping I really love deep connection with people. I really love holding a sacred and compassionate space for people and really getting to know people in a real way. Yeah, I hope to be a somewhat safe person to share anything with. I find a lot of humor in the world, and we have to have a lot of compassion for each other because it's challenging out there.
So true. So, what got you into this line of work?
I would say I was doing readings and energy healing for about 8 years, and I loved it. In many ways, I really loved the power of insights and the power of people seeing their lives from a bigger perspective and tuning into a realm that has a lot of wisdom. But I always felt like I was like scratching the surface. And whenever I would see in my family constellations workshops, being able to um, see the transformation of people actually connecting in and doing the deeper work and really getting grounded in their lives, I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, I really want to help people make real life transformation or change. So I like to say I've combined everything into what I call the heart solutions method, where you're taking like that battle between the heart and the mind, and how can you start listening at a deeper level to your being. And I've kind of combined everything to work one on one with people. Like, I don't want to just give you an insight. I just don't want to give you a drop of love. Like, I want you to feel loved, held, and supported. And I felt like it was one of my superpowers, that, I really can see the best in people and encourage people. And I have a lot of my own journey of trauma awareness and my own journey of having to go through the dark to come to the light. So I feel like it's very grounded in a reality that I can meet people where they're at.
Now, I know when we were talking, you mentioned that you'd love to talk about compassionate personal boundaries, especially around dysfunctional family members. So I'm wondering
Mm-hmm.
if you want to dive into that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I'll say I come from a background of being a member of adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. It's a 12-step program. So I've been in it for, oh gosh, 6 years now as a person attending it. Um, and there's so much, I would say that a lot of the big part of the program is doing your own inner work, coming back to yourself, having compassion for yourself, grieving the past, and seeing your family for what it is, right? So for me, that with the family constellations work has helped me do a lot of personal healing. I've been able to go through that journey of dealing with addiction in my family and my own personal struggles with mental health. And I used to have addictive tendencies with alcohol. So there's, a piece around dealing with the shame and then how we're enmeshed and get into codependent dynamics. And it creates chaos and it creates suffering. So I'm in the process of writing my memoir about my relationship with my father, who was a gambling addict and sort of had connections to criminal activity and all of this, and how I had to learn how to set boundaries with him. and how difficult that is because we're wired to love our parents and we're wired to be loyal to them. And and it wasn't until later on when he got dementia that I could actually have a relationship with him. Most people lose a relationship, whereas I actually got to have a relationship with him. But all along the way, he was my greatest teacher around emotional boundaries. How do I actually say no to my father? How do I make sure that I didn't align with his ethics or lack of ethics. I didn't, I felt like he could con me. Like there were all these things. And yet there was enough there that I felt like we actually loved each other. So I've had to learn how to have compassionate, like I could see his struggle, I could see his journey, I could understand him, and which I think is the greatest piece around boundaries that aren't rigid. You can actually go and see the person and say, I see that you're struggling. How do I not become a victim of your struggle? And at the same time, what are ways that I can express my love without getting hurt? So it could be phone calls, it could be a card in the mail, it would be, hey, let's go for a bike ride, or hey, let's go for a nature walk. Because I would always feel for myself to completely cut off my father at the time was also doing a disservice to myself, because I felt like there were parts of myself that were missing that I didn't. I felt like I was developing resentments. I felt like I was developing judgments. How can I soften myself and soften my heart so that I'm also able to move forward in life rather than getting stuck in the pain or getting stuck in the rigidity, right? So there's a whole, I'd chat more about the layers of how to set those boundaries, but I would say my own personal journey is definitely, I've walked the walk and I'm still walking the walk.
Right, right. Now, I know this subject is particularly interesting to me. I actually even teach a workshop around boundaries and define them, how to set them, how to practice maintaining them. Do you want to take a little bit deeper dive into the boundaries and,
Yeah.
when did you become aware that there even were boundaries? Because I didn't even become aware of it until my 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your
Mm-hmm.
story around that? When did you become
Mm-hmm.
aware of boundaries? Where did you go to learn how to set them? How did you practice
Mm-hmm.
them?
Mm-hmm. No, it's great. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I could definitely speak to a couple of areas. It's an interesting one because I'll go into my first experience with family constellations work as a person receiving it. And I would say that it's an ongoing process of setting boundaries. Like we're not really aware that we're caught or enmeshed until it becomes painful. And so I'd say the pain or if things are feeling overwhelming or just like chaotic conversations, then it's like a boundary, something has to change. And so I would say that when the pain gets too great, that's when you go, okay, something is wrong here. This isn't feeling peaceful. This isn't feeling grounded. This isn't feeling safe. So there are a combination of things like that I've learned about boundary setting. So part of it was education, which I'd highly recommend anyone learning about the cycle of abuse and power struggles and what are ways or tactics that people use to maintain power. And that it's not your responsibility to fix it when it's in that cycle. So I learned from that one about, what is beyond no, it's like, I don't have to engage this. Like, I don't want to be a statistic. And then another piece was then going through the 12-step program with adult children of alcoholics, where they really talk about, owning your stuff, following serenity, what can you say yes to, what can you say no to, learning about the language of codependency, and to actually go, oh, wait a second, I deserve to feel safe. I deserve to feel loved. I deserve to feel respected at a basic level of humanity. Like I don't have to have somebody bowing at my knees, but I deserve to have those fundamentals that everybody else deserves. And I deserve to feel, I don't want to say just supported. I mean, we're supported by the people who love us, but to feel, I'm going to say grounded and not like things turning upside down and in chaos. I deserve a sense of peace that way. So that program helped me define it, or really see how it's personal in my life, to actually reestablish I'm here to take care of myself. I have to form a loving parent within myself. Every human being will fail us in some level or disappoint us. Even the best kindest of people. I've disappointed people because they have their journey and I've got my journey. I'm one person. So then it's that real place of self-care, right? Of actually going, how does this feel right for me? Is this good for my nervous system? And if this is really draining, or this is like it's affecting my mental health, it's affecting my sleep, it's like I need to detach, or I need to change, or I need to not engage. So what I like about those ones, because sometimes people think boundaries is like line in the sand, we're gonna start, this is my territory, like, and it never felt right for me because I'm a compassionate person. I think those are the pieces where I learned the importance of like what are true self-care boundaries, and that it's, if I can let go of trying to fix change anyone else, and if I can just listen to what I need, then I can easily go yes or no.
I love that. I thought of this analogy I heard once, which I've used ever since. And they said, imagine a boundary is a bubble and it can expand and contract based on your environment, based on your mood, based on whatever is there. So you could have a very wide bubble boundary or a very narrow one. Um,
I love that.
and ever since I heard that, I've used it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what did your life look like before you started maintaining and practicing boundaries, and what does it look like now?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm just trying to think all along the way. I would say almost everything is a boundary setting and it's an ongoing journey. So I would say before I even came to awareness of it, I would say I was doing a lot of people pleasing. I'd say that I have a relationship addiction. So I would, I, I would say yes to things and all of a sudden be overwhelmed. All of a sudden, I'm on 3 different volunteer committee boards. I'm working 2 jobs. So burnout essentially, but it's just this stress, and then internally I was feeling guilty. I was feeling like I'm a bad person because I'm letting people down. I'm not doing enough for the world. So I had a little bit of that activist, not a little bit, a lot of that activist. I should be doing more. I should be making change. Why am I not? And then the feeling of not good enough, right? So um, but then I would be feeling like I would go into whether it's self-medicating with drinking too much wine, or just being in relationships that weren't actually good for me. I look back at some of my intimate partner relationships or experiences with dating, and I just go like it was so obviously not a match, right? Like so obviously, but I didn't have a real relationship with myself, and I was too much about the external, not even wanting approval as it was. Um, I was trying so hard to accept everyone that I wasn't listening to my needs, and I wasn't listening to my energy levels, and I wasn't listening to what was good for my body and my being and the kind of people I wanted to be with. My emotional needs were neglected at a very fundamental level. And so I'd say, I suffered from resentment. I had my own journey of depression. I felt burnt out. I didn't have a good relationship with my family of origin in the way of, I felt like I was constantly trying to fix them and change them and hope they could be the family I wanted, and would take on their problems, and then I would take on their suffering, and I was like, and it comes all from a good-hearted place. That's the crazy part, is I can sit there and go, Heather, there's nothing wrong with wanting to do well, nothing wrong with wanting to have compassion for your family members, nothing wrong with wanting to belong, but you're putting yourself in harm's way. You're putting yourself in circumstances that aren't good for you. And I was not living my future. I wasn't planting seeds for my success, I was held back by enmeshed relationships, shall we say, and not thinking about my life, my future, what's good for me.
Yeah, it's about balance, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Finding that balance between, especially when you're talking about dysfunctional families and boundaries around that, it's really important to find the balance between what is my role or obligation in relationship X? And what is my role and obligation as far as relationship to myself?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And trying to honor both is a balancing act.
Yeah, it really is, right? And I think I was mentioning this in what I submitted to you of the journey of sometimes when you do change the pattern in a family, it can go into chaos. But it's kind of like those mobiles like over babies things and this idea that like one if one goes off balance, then it's like everything goes and then it finds its balance point.
Right.
So usually the truth tellers, which would be me and the family. I mean, I think everyone could say they're a truth teller on some level in a family, but the truth tellers tend to be the disrupt, like they'll just disrupt the pattern because they're like, nope, nope, no. So then you can get chaos. You get people emailing you, we're not inviting you to Christmas dinner. You're like it can turn into drama, but sometimes it's good drama. Like I would describe it as there's a difference between the drama that comes from just like dysfunctional communication, um, people creating excitement just for the sake of it, or bad behavior, like things that are really unhealthy. I don't like saying bad, but unhealthy behavior, um, versus standing up for what is truth or standing up and pointing something out that's in denial or dysfunction. And from family constellations work, that's the core work, is the idea that we will carry family secrets forward over generations because of shame, because of guilt, because of just the problems in the world. What is it, what's good, bad, or ugly? What's taboo? It'll all be hidden in the family because it's seen as we don't want to go there, right? And real denial is ultimately the worst. Whenever there's denial, then you're going to have suffering and you're going to have dysfunction. So where this goes, it's so fascinating because when you break that pattern, it can actually create more disruption because people are like, you didn't just say that dad's an alcoholic, did you? like, like it's like the worst thing ever. But we're living, and what I love about the time we're living in is we're starting to destigmatize some of these things, right? We're starting to actually say it's okay to talk about mental health. It's okay to talk about addiction. It's okay to talk about psychiatric issues. It's okay to talk about illness. Like how many times women couldn't talk about anything from the waist down, right? But we're finally living in times where we can talk about these things without shame. But always the person who sets the boundary, says, I'm stopping this pattern, I'm breaking the cycle, they're gonna get backlash. Like it's a given, but that's what's moving the system forward. That's actually what's needed to move your life forward and to move your system forward. If you're in denial, like it's like if you're in a cycle of denial, you're going to constantly be pulled backwards rather than moving forward. So you're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel like the bad person. You're going to feel like you're why can't I just get along with everyone? Why do I always have to point, like, why me? Right. But it's actually helping the system move forward. It's actually a divine act.
Beautifully said. And it is so true. I mean, you have to be willing when you're beginning to set the boundaries that you have to be willing to take some of that backlash. That's part of the boundaries because people are going to test your boundaries. Think of teenagers for the people that have teenagers. Or even toddlers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kids get to a point in their development where they need to test the boundaries. Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be dependent for their entire lives. But they have to be able to test it. And so you have to be able to maintain those.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it
Mm-hmm.
gets really out of control really fast.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that one of the important aspects of this is communication. Practicing how you're going to communicate, especially if you've gone through your life and say a situation like yours or mine where there have been dysfunctional families and suddenly the light bulb goes off and they're like, this doesn't have to continue. Let's break this cycle. And you speak out and you get the backlash. It's important to learn how to say it and to say it with compassion.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if you've had a situation where you take the grandkids over to the grandparents' house, or you're separated or divorced and the kids go to the spouse's house and the spouse is drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And you've kind of
Mm-hmm.
put up with it for a long time because you know it's going to be a lot to handle.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
to say, hey, I've noticed this pattern. I think it's disruptive. I'm just letting you know that I'm really working on this, and this is how I envision my kids staying here.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do
Mm-hmm.
have a choice of whether to take them or not, say, in
Yeah.
order for this to continue, this is what has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be fully
Mm-hmm.
present, no substances like alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just charging in and saying, hey,
Yeah.
you're an idiot, stop drinking, or you're an
Yes.
idiot, stop smoking pot with my kids. You want to present it in a way so that you're not triggering people's ego or defense
Mm-hmm.
system or
Mm-hmm.
creating a more negative situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just keep
Absolutely.
practicing that. And maybe you have to practice in the mirror a few times and then
Mm-hmm.
give yourself
Mm-hmm.
grace
Yeah.
because you're going to screw it up in the beginning.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I would
And
say
not to
it's like,
quit, just to keep trying.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the real place of self-compassion and, and I would say with dysfunctional families, anyone who's been through, and everything's dysfunctional, but I would say the really like, high level dysfunction of personality disorders, deep trauma, abuse, all of this sort of thing. To real self compassion, you almost have to have a psychotherapy, psychiatric degree to figure out how to communicate at a high level because it's very complicated. Where, to know you're not responsible ultimately for how a person reacts or responds ultimately, but you can only do your best to try to still treat the person with the respect they deserve, right? To go like, okay, I see that this person is suffering with drinking too much or smoking too much weed. How do I not say things that are judgy? How do I say things that are not harsh and critical and putting them down? Like this is a human being that deserves basic respect. That this is what I love with the constellations work, where you go, I see you and see that you are fully responsible for all of your choices, and that you are a full-grown human who can deal with the consequences. I will treat you with the level of respect of not being bigger than you, superior to you, better than you. Like sometimes people who are on a recovery journey, we can get superior because we have the knowledge and we feel like we're healthier people. But how do I approach you from a way that, how would I want to be treated if I were suffering with some of these issues? I'm going to look at you and say, I also see that your crutch or your behavior or your patterns are something that you even don't have control over, right? Not out of feeling pity for you, not out of not giving you responsibility to get help, but I'm going to know the limit as to how I will feel safe and comfortable with my kids or with my dog or with myself. What limits do I need to set in how much I can trust you to take care of this person or to take care of this? If I need to go, you know what? You need to go, like, this is an interesting part too, where you'll have family members, say somebody, and this is my experience with criminality in my family. There's such a part of my own psyche, like no kid would want to see their parent go to jail, right? There was a point where I had to come to, my dad never ended up in jail, which surprised me. And I'm glad on one level. He ended up in jail in a different way with dementia. But to actually go, like, it came to a point where I was like, you know what? If this person has to go to jail for the safety of themselves and for the safety of others, that's actually the best thing for them. And if I have to be part of that process, no child should be part of that process. But if a family member or a person, if that is part of what has to happen for them to get the help they need or for them to be contained, then I will advocate for humane prisons. I will advocate for humane treatment of people who need to be contained. But there's also, they have to live with their consequences too, right? So there's, when you can give people responsibility for how they're behaving, not in a harsh way or in a, but it's like, what is the healthiest for the good of all and the safety of all, including seeing that this person needs help. I can't help them. They have to want to get the help. I can give them pamphlets. I can give them ideas. I can be that person that just sort of plants the seed. But then if I'm looking at my kids, or if I'm looking at to go, how much can I trust? I don't want to blindly trust. I can only trust what's in front of me. If I see that he's drinking all day, every day, and he's not getting help, then I won't be surprised that he can't control that impulse if he's around my kids. Right. So even if I say it, like set the boundary and he doesn't abide by it, I also have to go, what's my part in realizing I'm not reading the room? Right. I need to actually see this person exactly for who they are, eyes wide open, and what can I trust with them and what can't I trust with them? And that's setting a boundary, right? A loving boundary, right? Because
Yeah.
ultimately, and just on that last piece, ultimately, I love this from a higher perspective. Your perpetrator ultimately doesn't want you as a victim. Like when you actually see, like if you're going to look at serial killer, they'll say, I feel out of control. I don't want to actually hurt anyone. Right. So if you take that down to small perpetrating, like the person with addiction doesn't ultimately want to hurt anyone because they're hurting on the inside, they're hurting themselves. So it's like, how do I make sure I'm not setting myself up to being victimized? And how do I make sure that I'm not victimizing the kids, even though my heart wants them to have a father? Right. It's like, how do we actually just see what is?
Yeah, I love that piece about the compassionate boundary setting. Especially people that are in trauma informed, they understand that the reason someone is drinking or gambling or doing any other type of behavior that's preventing them from having a more fulfilled life, it's usually because they're hiding some type of pain. Maybe
Yeah.
it's abuse, maybe it's some trauma that is unknown, but they're doing that to fill a need.
Yeah.
Something is missing.
Yeah.
And so to come at them with a superior attitude, like you were saying, some people do, it only makes the situation worse because they already feel bad about themselves
Mm-hmm.
when they're out
Mm-hmm.
of control with that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't need to feel more bad. And I think
Yeah.
the other important point that you mentioned is when you set a boundary, you have to know what the consequence is of people not meeting that boundary. Because when you
Mm-hmm.
know that ahead of time, it actually makes your boundary stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Going back
Mm-hmm.
to the bubble analogy, you know where the bubble boundary is. And so when someone crosses it, you need to know what
Yeah.
your plan is for how to
Yeah.
handle it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I can I can say that with a recent conflict that I've had with my sister where I kept saying, I don't want to talk about politics with you. I don't want to talk about politics with you because I know it goes into crazy land. Like it just goes into this weird, and I'm like, and triggers fly for both of us. And I'm like, I just want to be at holidays. I want to do some crafts and I want to eat some dinner. But it's like, and I don't want to blame her, but she has a need to bring it up, right? She has a need to actually want to address this for whatever reasons. And so I said, okay, wow, well, I can't do holidays with you because holidays are sacred. I love you. I can't talk about politics with you. Like I just can't. It gives me indigestion. It makes me
So
frustrated.
in that situation, what was the consequence of not honoring
Yes.
the boundary?
Yeah, so we're not spending holidays together.
Hmm.
So because and I would say it's just out of, if she were to acknowledge to go, yeah, I'm sorry I brought it up. Let's not do it again. I don't want to do that. It would be different. But because there isn't an acknowledgement or an awareness of how important that is for me to not go there, um, it's it's going to happen again. Right. So my sense of it, if I'm like, it's going to happen again. I want to have a happy holiday. I know the kind of holidays I want. So I have it visualized, I have it in my fields, and I'm like, it's not going to be that. Right. And so unless I'm reassured, unless it's like, you know what, you're right, I just want to have a good time with you. I promise I won't bring this up and we'll try again. So it's like, okay, I could do a little, let's do a couple hours together. Let's see if that works. And if it were to go into that territory again, I would probably just go, I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to leave. And we just can't do this. Right. So, yeah.
So we've talked about a lot today. If you were to summarize everything you wanted to say into two or three main points, do you think you could do that?
Yes, give me a second. Listen to yourself, listen to your energy of where you feel safe, where you feel energized, where you feel you can be yourself at all times. That's the place to come back to before, and then when dealing with family members, to own your responsibility and give others the responsibility, and kind of stay in your lane. Well, like figure out what is good for you. And the best thing you can do is by unknotting the pattern, it's unknot the pattern within yourself. And that's going to actually lead to more forward movement and more, and it might lead to disruption, but it's like you know yourself best. So continue to listen to that place and try to, and then know what boundaries, what limits you need to set.
Great advice. So at the end of each episode, I really like to give people a call to action, something that they can do right now after the podcast to go and improve their lives, make their lives better, infuse their future. Do you have something like that for people today?
Yes, it's I'm going to ask you to open a window to your past, not be afraid of your past or your roots or where you've come from. Open a window to your past and see if there's any part of you that can relate, or you feel you're avoiding, or you feel you're holding any shame or judgment about, and go, how can I change that to compassion?
That's a good one. That's a big one.
I was like, I feel like you have to go to the past before you can go to the future. Like you have to go, wait a minute, I'm stuck in something unconscious. Like I don't know where I'm suffering in this. Like mine was, I had to own, I was in so much denial of my own depression because we didn't want to talk about it in our family. It was like the taboo topic. So when I actually looked at it, and when I struggle with depression, and that is a lifelong journey that comes from my family system. So then now I can own it and I can have compassion for it instead of avoiding, judging, trying to be perfect. Then I can move forward.
That sounds great. Now, if somebody wants to come and work with you, where do they find you and what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. So definitely you can check out my website at www.csoul, so the letter C and then soul, soul.ca. It's Confident Soul Coaching. So I offer we could do a free clarity call. I call it Find a Solution. So if you're wanting to turn a blah into a sweet aha, we're going to come into awareness and insights around a problem you're struggling with. And then there's two packages that I offer. There's one that's the sort out my heart package, for specifically looking at a problem or an issue. If you're like, I can't get out of the cycle of self-hate, why? What's going on? So we're going to do 3 sessions and unpack that issue. Or how do I leave my ex? Or how do I set a boundary on this? We're going to unpack it in 3 sessions. So it's a really quick way to be able to have some profound breakthrough. The bigger package I offer, which is a 3-month Mend and Bloom program. And that's where we look at your patterns from your family, your past, your ancestors. And we set new heart-based goals and intentions for your life, and looking at some of those beliefs that you've been carrying. So you can actually set real inspired goals to move forward.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for being on the show. I loved having this conversation.
Likewise. Thank you, Carla, for doing what you're doing and spreading the word of self-care and boundaries.